Okay, so we're going to dive into Maya about as deep as you can get today, and begin the understanding of writing scripts and what goes on in the background of Maya. So to understand this, I'm going to use deformers to explain it. I'm going to create just a simple cube, and I'll resize it a little bit. Do the channel box, and I'm going to up-res it just a little bit. This is all really not necessary. Okay, so there's my cube, and I'm going to open up. I'm going to split my panel. I'm going to load the hypergraph, input-output connections in this view over here. Now that didn't work because I didn't have the cube selected. So I'm going to shrink down my perspective view a whole lot because what goes on in there is not going to be all too important. But if I click on this little icon up here, the input-output connections icon, it'll bring up this window here. And I can see what information is actually being passed around. So I have a polycube 1, which is feeding information into the p-cube shape 1, which is pointing to the initial shading group. And your initial shading group, so if I select all of these and then click it again, I'll get another set of nodes, and additional nodes. And I can see that Lambert 1 is my default shader for Maya, is plugged into the initial shading group. And that's how, and this relationship right here is what makes my box be able to use the initial shader. Now I can break this connection here by selecting the arrow and then hitting delete. And even though I'm in shaded mode now, it just renders it in wireframe because it doesn't know how to hook it up. It doesn't know how to render it anymore. So I told it not to. Okay, so I'll undo that. Now, if I delete history on this, so go to select my cube and go to delete by type history, you'll see that this rearranges itself again. And it removes the nodes that no longer exist, the deleted history. The history are just nodes. And if I reframe this with the cube only selected, then I can see that polycube whatever that allowed me to subdivide the mesh over here in the inputs section of the channel box, which no longer exists, it's gone. Okay, now that's one way to see what's going on. Now if we're digging into this editor here and we want to see what's connected to what, all we have to do is hover over this arrow and it will show us what the connection is that's being made. Now I think it'll stay there if I don't move my mouse. Nope, it times out and goes away. So I'm going to read it real quick. So we have p-cube shape 1 dot inst object groups 0. Now anytime you see a dot, that means that it's leading to an attribute of an object. Whenever you see an arrow connecting to objects, it is connecting an attribute of this, in this case, this object, into an attribute of this object. And so it's just relaying information. It's like passing a note to your friend. Okay, so in this case, inst object 0 is connected to the initial shading group .dag set member 0. Okay, you don't even have to understand it. But if you wanted to duplicate this setting some point in the future, then all you'd have to do is make this connection on your object into this same initial shading group. Okay, now it's important to note, you go to this, here. So in my regular hypergraph, or in your outliner, I'm going to show you hypergraph because that's what I like. If you go to display shape nodes, the same two nodes, this node is your transform, and this node is the shape that belongs to that transform. It turns out that this shape can belong to any number of transforms. Okay, so let me change this panel back to perspective, and if I go to edit, delete by type, or not delete by type, sorry, on the wrong mode. If I go to edit, duplicate special, options box, and I can set the geometry type to instance. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and change the scale to 0 so it's all normal. But when I duplicate a mesh, I like to do this when I'm modeling, especially in a character. So it creates a new instance of the character. I can invert the mesh, and then whatever I do on one side will happen to the other side of the character. We'll get to that in a little bit. I'm not going to necessarily show that this time. So X, Y, and Z, they're always in that order, X, Y, Z. I'm going to set this to 5 and click duplicate. Okay. Now you'll see that I have two different transforms. One's called pcube1, one's called pcube2, and I have a single shape node. Now let's view this relationship in the hypergraph hierarchy editor. So this transform and this transform are both using this shape. So if I select pcube, oh, sorry, my Maya navigational skills are lacking today. If I select either one of these cubes and I go into component mode, let's go to faces. When I select this face, you'll see that it actually has the face the face on this mesh also selected, and it edits them both because it's actually the same shape. It just exists in two places because there's two different transforms. Yes. Now if you don't do it as an instance, like if I were to select this and go to edit, duplicate special, and do a copy, then it's going to create a whole other mesh. And you can see that here I have pcube shape 3 and pcube 3, which is the transform. Okay, so that's the inputs outputs editor. We're getting into too much detail, but just know that if an object exists, it can be fully explained in this editor. Okay, now there's one other editor I'll show you that can view all these same connections that some people prefer more than others, not myself, so you won't see me working in it much. But if you go to rendering editors, hypershade, then you can also see a lot of the same information. So if I were to select all these objects and then tell it to frame it, down here in the bottom, so I can't even remember how to do that for sure, but so we'll go to, let's see, well, there's more than one way. So I can select and click middle mouse click and drag a node and drop it in this work area. And I can click on this button and tell it to frame the inputs and outputs of it. And I have the very same graph and slightly different icons that exist here. In fact, but this one shows more rendering nodes. Okay, so if you were a rendering artist or a lighting artist or shader artist, then this would probably be your editor of choice. Okay, I just wanted to show you, and it works the same way. You hover over a connection. Now I should note that if you have two different arrows here, right? This one's really thin and this one's thick. If you see a thick one, it just means that